Hey there, just quickly, this video is actually part of a much larger video that I uploaded on the 11th of May. Be sure to check that out if you want to watch all of it at once, but I thought I'd make little versions because I know 4 hours can be quite daunting to some people. So here is the Third Doctor's era, and let's get straight into it. Following Troughton's departure at the end of Season 6, Season 7 is basically seen as a proper reboot for Doctor Who. Finally in colour, and taking place completely on Earth throughout this season, and essentially the next two as well, minus a couple of little changes. Brand new Third Doctor played by Jon Pertwee is immediately interesting, and I do genuinely love him as one of my favourites. And this season, let's just say that I have some opinions on this season that we are going to get into. Spearhead from Space is another incredible introduction, the second best in my opinion, following Tomb of the Cybermen for any Doctor Who season, never mind just the classic and modern era. Honestly, Spearhead from Space is exactly what you need this kind of story to be. It introduces UNIT properly after their appearance in the previous season. It introduces brand new companion Liz Shaw, who is one of my all-time favourites, definitely in my top 5 Doctor Who companions ever, and also introduces a Third Doctor perfectly, as well as the damn Autons, who would go on to be a recurring villain throughout the show as well. Everything about this story just clicks. My only issue, honestly, is that the first 2 episodes do feel a little bit padded, and I do mean that in the most minute way. Overall, this story is honestly amazing, and yeah, this is such a good introduction to Season 7, and it doesn't really fall much from here. Doctor Who and the Silurians is definitely another weird title for this show. So apparently it's because the production team behind the scenes would call each episode Doctor Who and the Spearhead from Space, for example. But with this one, they didn't know that, so it still kept the Doctor Who and the Silurians, so just being called the Silurians, and I just think that's funny. But yeah, this episode's a 7-parter and doesn't need to be. It should be a 6, and you can kind of feel that extra episode was kind of padded out, especially for episodes 4 and 6. But yeah, this story is great. I love the Silurians immediately. They're such an interesting and complex villains, mostly for the fact that they're not villains. I love the arguments between the Brigadier and the Doctor here. Liz shows just how intelligent she is as a character and why she's necessary for this season and this soft reboot. Yeah, Doctor Who and the Silurians is another great story, and Season 7 is really off to a great start. The Ambassadors of Death is honestly a bit of a step down from the previous 2 stories, and since there's only 4 this time due to stuff that Jon Pertwee personally requested, it is a shame to see it step down. Once again, it's another 7-parter that should be a 6, and it has its problems with its pacing. The Ambassadors of Death is quite a slow burn story, but honestly, I don't mind it most of the time. It's only in the second half that I feel it starts to lose its ground a little with its pacing, and the overall plot is definitely an interesting one, definitely something unique to Doctor Who due to the Earth-based stories of Season 7. And overall, I do really enjoy this story at points. I just wish it was a bit shorter. It didn't need to be 7 parts, and it does drag on for a bit longer than usual. The main cast are as amazing as always, but overall I'd have to state this story is decent. Slight blip on Season 7, but when decent is the lowest of your episodes, it's a pretty good season. For the final story of Season 7, we have Inferno, and I'm just going to go right off the bat. This is going to be at the top of the list when I do the ranking of each stories. I love Inferno. I love how the first 2 episodes introduces us to the supporting cast of this story, really solidifies the Brigadier and Liz as the pseudo-companions for this season, since neither of them actually travel in the TARDIS. Jon Pertwee is perfect as always. I love the accurate scientific stuff. I even love the last episode, which most people have an issue with for returning to it, and the 4 episodes in between. Let's just say that the BBC didn't allow Nazis to be properly shown on television back in the 70s. So this episode took some creative liberties, which in my opinion, perfectly pay off. all the stuff with the, like, devolved people, it's so cool. I love this story, every aspect of this story. It feels like a 7-parter, which needed all 7 parts to work. Yeah, greatest of all time. So, yeah, to anyone worrying, my opinions of season 7 are ridiculously positive. I adore this season. It's one of my favourite seasons of Doctor Who in general, never just mind the classic or modern eras. It just works for me. Even the low point of the Ambassadors of Death, as you can see from my ratings here, is still a 6 out of 10. It's still decent. Nothing here is either mixed or lower. It's decent, even with that one story. But this season as a whole is great. It's the first season of the show that I would say is properly great. No real duds. Absolute classics constantly. 2 iconic monsters to the show with the Autons and the Silurians. And yeah, this season is honestly just great. Amazing at times. And it's one of my favourite seasons of television in general. And when you change it over to rankings, yeah, Inferno is obviously at number 1. Don't expect that to change anytime soon, or possibly ever, unless I make a video combining both the classic and modern eras, which, wow, that video would be about 9 hours, wouldn't it? Following on from the end of Season 7, Season 8 continues the Earthbound theme of that previous story, and yeah, Season 8 is definitely a weird one for me. Introduces brand new companion who I absolutely adore, Joe Grant, as well as adding a lot more to the unit family after Sergeant Benton started to become a more recurring character at the end of Season 7, and introduces Mike Yates with Season 8 from now on for quite a while. Season 8 is definitely a weird one overall though, and let me explain what I mean. The first story with Terror of the Autons is basically a sequel to Spearhead from Space, and a massive introduction to Joe Grant as a new Doctor's companion. And yeah, this story is good. I see a lot of fans adore this story, especially the introduction of Roger Delgado as the Master. And yeah, I enjoy all those aspects, but some parts of this story really do just feel like a rehash of Spearhead from Space, and that's a problem for me. I love the fact that they have a brand new recurring villain after the Daleks and the Cybermen, but with the Autons, there's only so much you can do with them, and I feel like most of the stuff this story does was already pretty well explained in Spearhead. I do still like this story, I still think it's good, it's just a bit of a rehash for me. The Mind of Evil is a story that a lot of people hate, and honestly, I never fully understood why. It's a really cool concept, in my opinion, showing something that literally creates the character's worst fears and manifests it into a semi-reality state. It's really awesome. I love all the stuff to do with the peace conference. The Brigadier, as always, is absolutely hilarious whenever he tries to argue with the Doctor and just goes, "Yes, but I am in charge," and Free just responds with, "Yeah, you kind of are, aren't you?" Jo is great in this story, really starting to be solidified by Katie Manning's performance. And yeah, this story is really fun. Until the Master appears in it. Now, don't get me wrong, I love the Master as a villain. I think he's great in the previous story, and I think Roger Delgado is definitely underrated due to his untimely death. But he really didn't need to be in this story, and it starts to become a problem from here on out that he just keeps appearing. You'll see what I mean later. Still a good story. The Claws of Axos is an amazing story, trapped within the body of a decent one. A lot of the ideas in the Claws of Axos are really interesting and really cool, and then once again, as mentioned in the previous story, the Master appears and is actually the main villain, and the Axonites just kind of stand around and do nothing for the last 2 episodes until the last 10 minutes. It's honestly such a shame. The first 2 episodes of this story are really intriguing. Obviously, the Doctor and Jo are great as always. Even the Brigadier has a slight step back in this story to try and give a bit more breathing room to Jo as a new companion. And then the Master just appears at the end of episode 1. And all the tension is gone because it's another, the Master is the villain story. So I have such mixed feelings on this, but overall I'd still say it's decent. I still enjoy the Claws of Axos, even if it is quite a step down. Colony in Space is one of those stories which, every single time someone mentions it, I have to go, which one's that again? Honestly, Colony in Space, despite being the first story actually set in space in season 6, isn't very memorable. It's another political anti-capitalist story, which I'm usually really having fun with, that just doesn't know what it wants to be. It's a 6-parter that feels like it only had enough plot for about 3-4 episodes. And yeah, so the way that they make it into 6 parts is they just bring the Master in again. So you know exactly what's going to happen. Him and the Doctor are going to have a conversation, they're going to come to a disagreement, the Master will continue his plan and the Doctor will stop him in the end. It's just exactly the same thing as the previous 3 stories, but with much worse side characters, and it's 6 parts instead, so it's even more boring. Even the Mind of Evil was able to balance 6 parts. This episode does not. This episode and story overall is meh. It is a 4. Sorry. The Demons finally feels like it's actually continuing on from where season 7 left off with its high quality. So honestly, The Demons is a weird story. It's not overly sci-fi and more falling into like folk horror tropes, which really works. Even the Master's random appearance in this story makes a lot more sense than in the previous 3, and he really does start to show himself as a much more maniacal psychopath, as he would later be portrayed by future incarnations. I really enjoy The Demons. I love the creepy Wicker Man-styled setup of the story. I love John Pertwee as the Doctor. I love the Unit family in this story. Everything about this just really works out. Until the last episode, which I feel ends very suddenly. Since this story is only a 5-parter, I feel like it could have really benefited from being a 6 instead. A lot of the aspects of the first 4 episodes are just quickly explained and dropped instead of being fully expanded on. But still, great story. So yeah, I understand a lot of people really enjoy season 8, but for me it is a massive step down in quality from season 7. Not as bad as season 6 to say, but a huge drop-off from the previous season, mostly due to Roger Delgado as the Master appearing in every single story. Now, don't get me wrong, I love his portrayal of the Master, he is one of my favourites, but when he keeps appearing in every story, instead of making each villain unique and special, it just completely sidelines them to focus on him instead. I do like a lot of aspects of this season, such as the Unit family becoming a much stronger part. I absolutely love Jo Grant as just being one of the funniest companions and one of the sweetest companions in the entire show. But as you can see from my ratings, when it comes to the actual stories themselves, there's only one that I think is great, 3 that I'm a bit more I enjoy, but don't exactly love, and then 1 story which is completely forgettable. It exists and it is fine, but to be honest, actually no, not even fine. It's forgettable. Yeah, season 8 for me, it's got its problems, let's just say that. Jumping on to season 9 now, and apparently the BBC did hear some complaints about Roger Delgado's Master appearing in every story, as this time he only appears in 2 of the 5, which to me is definitely much better. When it comes to season 9 though, a lot of this seems to be bringing back old concepts, and focusing on the 3rd Doctor himself being a bit more out of his depth, which I do enjoy. As you'll see though later on, I do have some mixed feelings on this season, so let's just get straight into it. Day of the Daleks is one of the strangest Dalek stories ever. Now, for these videos, I am trying to watch the original versions as well as the newer, updated versions, just so I get a full, clear image. And the original voices of the Daleks in this story are completely trash. I'm glad they brought in Nicholas Briggs to redo them because it really helps, as does the overall special effects increase of the special edition. But the story itself isn't good. It's a timey-wimey, like, future Terminator-styled plot well before Terminator even came out. That just doesn't work for me. A lot of the stuff that's explained doesn't actually make any sense even when characters explain it. The Daleks aren't the main threat of this story, as it originally wasn't even written as a Dalek story, and the Third Doctor kills people in it. But it's also really so stupid that it's really, really fun to watch. I'd say overall it's a decent story. Not good by any means, but it's quite enjoyable. Now, speaking of steps up in this series, honestly, Peladon is incredible at times. The Curse of Peladon is one of my favourite Third Doctor stories. It is honestly amazing. I wouldn't say it's the greatest of all time or anything, mostly due to the fact that I feel like it could have benefited from a 5th episode, and it feels a little bit short at the ending, but everything from Aragon being one of the cutest but also kind of creepiest monsters in the franchise, ignoring the kind of dodgy special effects, the Third Doctor and Joe actually on a proper alien planet being fully explorable, really damn cool. I love all the supporting characters, and of course, this story has got my boys, my Ice Warriors, and they're being portrayed as good guys for once, which is awesome to see, and something that the show doesn't really do with any other villains apart from them. This story is honestly amazing. I would highly recommend it now that it's on BBC iPlayer, and yeah, 9 out of 10. I'm going to get a lot of annoyed comments for this, but honestly, I'm not the biggest fan of the Sea Devils, mostly due to its length. It's a 6-part story that should be a 4. A lot of stuff just doesn't happen in the 2nd to 5th episodes. They're very slow-paced at times, and it's where a lot of my issues come from. I will state I love the Sea Devils as villains. It's nice to see Roger Delgado as the Master as the villain again after 2 stories where he doesn't appear, and it feels more organic with him actually appearing in this one, since it seems like he's actually had this scheme cooking for a long time. Sword Fight is also great. I love the action sequences on the beaches, and once again, Sea Devils are little cutie boys and I love them. But this story is really boring to me. Multiple times throughout, I found myself constantly checking my phone to see what else was going on, something that I hadn't done for quite a while by this point, even throughout season 8. I am a bit disappointed that I don't enjoy it as much as other fans do, so I have to give it a decent, but I'm glad other people enjoy it more than I do. The Mutants is one of the most mid things I've ever seen in my life. It is one of the most serviceable, acceptable Doctor Who plots ever that does absolutely nothing new. Add the radiation aspects of the original Dalek story, along with the folk, politics, random stuff of capitalism versus like socialism / communism, etc. And yeah, that's the Mutants. It is fine to boring. I don't enjoy this story much, and it's a 6-parter that does not need to be as long as it is. It drags on, especially after episode 2, where it seems like all the characters just drag to a halt with their own intentions. Yeah, The Mutants is a 4 out of 10. It's boring, but not exactly bad. Speaking of stories that are boring but not exactly bad, hey, remember the 2nd Doctor when they blew up Atlantis? Well, we're blowing it up again, and the Master is here for reasons that aren't ever really specified, and nothing happens. But all the cast members are absolutely perfect and on point, so the Time Meddler is such a weird story to me. All the cast are giving it their all, they're all incredible throughout, including the new supporting cast members. But the story just doesn't do much until the last 2 episodes. It feels like it was originally a 2-parter, or maybe even a 3-parter, which somehow ended up as 6 parts. The first 4 episodes, nothing happens. And, like I said, the only positive thing is the cast are giving it their all throughout. I really enjoy the performances, especially some of the banter between the Doctor and the Master in this story. But, yeah, overall this story is just very forgettable and very meh. So yeah, despite my dislike for Season 8, I honestly think Season 9 is worse. There is only one story, as you can see from my ratings, that I actually like properly. And Yeah, The Curse of Peladon is as good as it gets, which is an amazing story, don't get me wrong. But when two other stories are a 6, they're decent, they're watchable, fun enough, and then two of them are just forgettable, really not a good season, and a massive step down even from season 8, which I personally don't have much fun with. Season 9's a strange season to me. I'll never fully understand the love some people have for it, but, you know, if you enjoy it and you enjoy the Sea Devils, good for you. But for my rankings, yeah, it's pretty obvious what was going to be on top. It's a shame, as this is essentially the last season properly with the unit family, as next season, a lot of things are about to change. Season 10 is definitely one of those weird seasons of Doctor Who, another semi-transitionary period, but this time keeping the same Doctor and companion. You'll see exactly what I mean with the first story being the 10th anniversary special, sort of, don't worry about it, as well as many other aspects of this season feeling very anniversary-esque. This season is also kind of notable for the fact that Katie Manning decided to step down before we started production of it, and decided to stay until the final story of the season. But yeah, let's get straight into it, because season 10 is a wild ride. The Three Doctors is the first multi-Doctor story in Doctor Who's history, and honestly, it's a pretty high benchmark to start with. This story is amazing at times, with some of the cheesiest, funniest lines in the entire show, especially when the Brigadier meets the second and third Doctors at the same time, with Omega being such a cheesy, over-the-top villain in every possible aspect, which is one of the things I love about this show. I really enjoy everything about the Three Doctors, with the only negative really being William Hartnell, who could only be shown through the television screen on the TARDIS, whilst 2 and 3 are bantering. I understand why this had to happen due to Hartnell's health, but it still feels a bit disappointing to me personally. Other aspects which aren't exactly perfect would be the weird little monster things that Omega keeps sending out, and yeah, they do just look terrible, but at the same time, this is Doctor Who. Bad monster design and cheesy special effects is one of the things we love most, so the story is still amazing to me. Speaking of stuff that's amazing, Carnival of Monsters is one of the greatest of all time. It's another Keys of Mariner style thing where each episode follows a different mini-story, and with this one, I feel like they finally perfected the formula for Classic Who. Each story feels unique and different while still continuing on from the previous one, and still being a massive part of an overarching narrative which is shown through some of the characters. The Doctor and Jo are honestly incredible. I love the fact we're able to use the TARDIS again. The miniscope is one of the coolest little things ever made, and it's also nice to see a little Cyberman cameo here, their only appearance in the third Doctor's entire era. Yeah, this season so far has been great, and Carnival of Monsters is one of the greatest stories in Doctor Who history. I am shocked we've never tried to do another miniscope story since, and honestly, I kind of wish they did. 10 out of 10, no questions. Frontier in Space is an absolutely amazing 4-parter, trapped completely behind a 6-parter, where the only way they were able to pad the runtime is by having the Doctor and Jo continuously get captured, and my god, does it get so tiring by episode 3. And since this story is a 6-parter, that really does drag on. I love Roger Delgado returning for the final time as the Master due to his untimely death. I love the ending twist. I love all the stuff with Earth versus the Draconians. It's so cool and so political and so relevant to the time. And then the Doctor gets captured again. And then they get released and we get about 5 minutes of plot, and then they're captured again. And it really drags the story because it is so interesting, apart from the prison scenes. But the prison scenes are about half the runtime, so I have to give the story a mixed. I'm sorry, guys. It's the first stud of this season. Planet of the Daleks is normally very looked down on due to it being a best-of compilation, and yeah, that's what Planet of the Daleks is. It's basically a remake of all the previous Dalek stories combined into one, as a 6-part story taking place on the so-called Planet of the Daleks, which is now Spyrodon instead of Skaro. And yeah, it's a best of compilation, and for some reason, people think that's a bad thing. I'm sorry guys, Planet of the Daleks is definitely a best of compilation, but there's a certain thing that people forget when they state that. Best of. Planet of the Daleks is one of the funnest, dumbest, most enjoyable stories in all of Doctor Who. It is not original. I'm not going to pretend it's original, but all the stuff it combines together with the minor little tweaks and new aspects, such as the Supreme Dalek, are awesome. I love this story. It's great to me. I understand why some people call it the worst of the entire Third Doctor's era, but for me, this is a great story. I'm sorry. The Green Death is yet another great story. Overall, I'd actually say it's a good story, but that departure scene with Joe Grant, oh yes, it moves up to great. So for this one, it gets weird very often with giant maggots that have been mutated by like radiation and stuff. It actually sets up a plot point for season 11, which I think is really cool, and some at Classic Who didn't really do very often. But yeah, the Green Death is completely Jo Grant's story. She is the main character in this, not the Doctor. It really does fully flesh her out as a character, something that Classic Who companions only rarely got. And I love the fact that throughout this story, the Doctor is kind of a backbench secondary character until the ending. Jo really does take the spotlight here, and it's such a shame this is her last story for a very long time. I think the story is great. I really enjoy it. Yeah, really great story. For me, after 2 seasons of duds and questionable storytelling, Season 10 really does get back to the quality of Season 7. I wouldn't say overall it's as good as Season 7, mostly due to Frontier and Space having some very boring moments, and my weird love for Planet of the Daleks. But yeah, I love this season. It's really enjoyable, really damn fun. I was very excited when I bought the Season 10 collection set, because I could watch all these, and look at my ratings. I love this season. The only outlier is Frontier in Space, and I think it is genuinely due to it meaning to be a fall-parter. If it was a fall-parter, I would love it, but it's not. And because of that, this season is a bit of a dud due to just that one story. The rest, however, as you can see by my rankings, absolutely great. I struggled so hard deciding which I loved more, The Green Death or Planet of the Daleks, but there you go, that's what I decided to go with, and hopefully no one hates me for it. Season 11 of Classic Who is mostly famous for one specific thing, and that is the introduction of companion Sarah Jane Smith, who, let's be honest, modern or classic, you probably know who this character is. Season 11 is also really noticeable for one massive departure, with Jon Pertwee finally stepping down after 5 years in the role as the Doctor, mostly due to the tragic death of Roger Delgado, which occurred shortly after Season 10 was finished. Now, one thing I'll state for Season 11 is it feels like a very different show. There's a new title sequence and everything for this season, and yeah, there's kind of a reason for it. This is a massive tonal shift, in my opinion, from the past 4 seasons, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but as you'll see, let's get into that now. The Time Warrior is honestly a great start to this season. It's got some nice little bits of comedy. The introduction of the Sontarans, who become one of the most iconic Doctor Who foes of all time, is absolutely brilliant. Third Doctor is on complete full form throughout the entirety of this serial, and Sarah Jane's introduction is honestly a really good companion introduction. My main issue with this thing is it feels a bit slow. At 90 minutes long and a 4-parter, normally these would be quite fast-paced, but the Time Warrior can be slow at times, especially with episode 3. But overall, it's still a very enjoyable time. The historical modern-day setting is really cool and something that the modern era of Doctor Who would do a lot more often than the classic does. So the historicals weren't very common back in the day, and this is a pretty cool introduction to them to really take off and be used more often. Invasion of the Dinosaurs is that story. If you know anything about Classic Who's really bad special effects, This is probably the story that comes into your brain before anything else, and there is a reason for that. The dinosaurs in this look appalling, and when it comes to most of the special effects in this story, you can tell the budget and the technology just was not there yet, and it's a damn shame. Mostly because this story is actually really good. It has a lot of really interesting points and politics to make. The characters are all absolutely great. The betrayals that happen, that I won't reveal, are really intriguing to watch, and it's a really good send-off to the unit family stuff from the previous 3 seasons. This is the beginning of the end of it. And honestly, it sucks that this story I can only give a 7 out of 10 to, because there's so much good in it, but those dinosaurs are so bad, I can't look past it. Death to the Daleks is the third and final part of what's nicknamed the Third Doctor Daleks trilogy, and honestly, I'd also say this one goes out more with a whimper. Now, the story itself is intriguing, with the Daleks actually having to team up with the Doctor because they can't use their weaponry, but that's also removed pretty early on, as the Daleks just end up using normal guns instead of laser ones. And this is also the story with the infamous stop, don't move cliffhanger, which is awkward. There are some positives. Sarah Jane, especially in this story, really starts to come into her own as a companion. The Third Doctor, as always, is absolutely incredible, and a few of the supporting characters do have some good performances, although they're not the most interesting. In all honesty, this story is a massive mixed bag. The sets actually look really good for this season, but overall, I kind of get stuck, so I'm mixed on this one. 5 out of 10. So, when it comes to the Monster of Peladon, I honestly have nothing more to say to it apart from my original The Curse of Peladon review, and just have that again, but not as good because it's already been done before, and instead of it being a 4-parter, this one is a 6. So 2 extra episodes to tell essentially the same story with even less characters and plot than the first time. It's honestly a massive downer since this is like Sarah Jane's main space episode for this season, but yeah, it's a massive disappointment. This is a 4 out of 10. It's very meh. If you've seen The Curse of Peladon, there is no reason to watch this story. And finally for this season, we have Planet of the Spiders, which is honestly a really great send-off, not just to the Third Doctor, but to the Third Doctor's entire era. Jon Pertwee is on top form as per always, Elizabeth Sladen is on top form as per always, the supporting unit cast are on top form as always. Honestly, the only issue I have with this story is a 6-parter is a bit too long, but even so, because of the performances and the amount of references and callbacks to previous stories of the Third Doctor's era, it doesn't feel as long as most 6-parters do. I'd honestly count this as one of the best regeneration stories when it comes to the classic era for one simple fact: the amount of love, care and attention that this story gets for its previous references. The main problem with this is the spiders themselves. They're not the most interesting villains, and honestly, apart from the crystal being from Metebelis 3, there's not really much connection between the spiders and the rest of his era. I feel like they should have done a bit more to connect it properly when it comes to villains. Even so, great story, 8 out of 10. And that's season 11, probably one of the most mixed bags of the entirety of Jon Pertwee's era, if not his worst, I will state. There's a lot of things to love about season 11, such as Elizabeth Sladen's introduction as Sarah Jane Smith, the Third Doctor's departure, and of course everything to do with the unit family. But it has some kind of weak, repetitive storytelling, not the best villains, some pretty poor special effects at times, and it has definitely dragged it down a little bit for me. I know a lot of people love season 11, and there is nothing wrong with that. I'm glad you enjoy it. But for myself, I have a lot of issues with it. Even so, these are the ratings that I've given to each serial, and if we just swap them round, this is where my rankings would be. Like I said, season 11's a mixed bag, but Jon Pertwee's regeneration does it literally brings a tear to my eye. I really enjoyed his performance as the Doctor. I'm sad that we didn't get any more of the third, but He did last 3 more seasons than most, so be sure to join us next week or check out my much longer video for the 4th Doctor's era. But until then, toodles!